Today, we're going to be replacing brake pads, brake rotors, and brake calipers on this 2008 Honda Pilot. Let's get started. Got the rear up on jack stands here, and I've got the wheel off. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the brake caliper, and then we'll get the rotor off of there, and we'll get to switching some parts out. There are two bolts holding the brake caliper in place. One right up on the top right there, and one down low right here. Those are 14 millimeter bolts. And I like to take a 5-gallon bucket and have that ready in place. So when I remove the brake caliper, I can set that on top of the bucket. Once you get those loose, go ahead and slide that caliper off of there. And then just bring your bucket over and set it there. And then my frugal tip of the day is get as much out of your brake pads as possible. See, I wore those right down. I used it all up till bare metal. On a serious note though, don't let your brake pads wear all the way down like that. This is just a piece of metal. All of the brake pad wore off of that, as you can see there. That's a new brake pad. This is the old one. Don't let it wear down that far. That's dangerous. If you let your brake pads wear down that far, another thing that's going to happen is you'll get grooves worn into your brake rotors, and then your brake rotor is pretty much destroyed. You're going to have to replace that. There are two screws holding the brake rotor in place, as you'll see, one right here and one opposite right over there. Sometimes those can be a challenge to get out. We'll see how these go. They're Phillips head screws, so you got to get those out before the brake rotor will become free from that hub assembly. I've got a little impact gun here. I'm going to give this a try and see if I can't get these screws out with this. And I broke my bit. Those are a little stubborn. A little bit stubborn. I'll find myself a new bit. Wandering around my garage here. Broke another bit. Probably should take a different approach to this. I could sit there and keep breaking bits, or I can just drill them out, which is often a lot of times what I revert to doing. I've always heard that those screws aren't necessary. They just use them in the factory to hold the rotor in place before they put the wheel on. I've never put the screws back in place and haven't had any problems. Let's go ahead and drill these out. And it looks like we're free. Got my new brake rotor here. I'm gonna get this in place. It's always a good idea to clean these up with a little bit of brake cleaner. I've got two brake calipers here, and one is the right, one's the left. There is an R right there and an L right there. The left has the brake bleeder tip right there, and the right one has it over here. So something I like to do before I get the brake pads in place and the clips in place, I like to take one of these bolts out, and that allows the brake caliper assembly here to swing apart, and you can get the pieces in a lot easier. You can leave that bolt out while you go and you mount it in place and have your brake pads in place, and then you can swing that down and put the bolt back in place. Just be careful that when you're taking that bolt, when you're removing that bolt, putting it back in, don't damage that boot there. That boot's important to keep that pin clean. If that pin doesn't stay clean, then you're going to have seizing and other issues. All right, before I mount this brake caliper, I wanted to show you how those brake pads go in there. They just, you put your clips in and you slide them in, and you have, this is the kind of an alert system to tell you when your brake pads are getting low. So that's supposed to start making a squeaking sound when the pads get low, so make sure you have that in the right spot. Here I'm gonna remove the bolt holding the brake line on. That's a 14mm bolt. All right, struggling with that. Impact. If at first you don't succeed, get a bigger impact gun. Try to keep from spilling brake fluid everywhere. And don't get that on your skin. Good idea to wear gloves at this point, if you have them. I got the brake line attached. There's two washers for a reason. One goes up here and one goes down there. One should be on each side of that brake line. And I don't have my brake pads in here yet. I'm gonna go ahead and mount this caliper, and then while that's swinging free, I can get my pads in there nicely. Make sure you snug these bolts up good and tight. Don't want these bolts coming loose on you. This is swinging freely. That's going to allow us to get our brake pads in place. I'll show you this here. I've got the brake pad. Most brake pads will come with a packet of lubricant that you can use. I have a bottle here. It's a little easier to work with, but I just put some on the back. You don't want to get this on the surface of the brake pad or brake rotor, but I take this and I just spread it around a little bit on that pad, and then I take some and I put some on the ears. Not rocket science. So I'll just swing this up like so, and that will allow me to slide that brake pad right into place and go right up against the rotor. And that will swing down, and then I'll do the same on the other side here. The other brake pad will slide into these clips here on the other side, and then you can just swing that caliper closed and put the bolt back in place. Make sure you tighten that up. And if you're having trouble closing your caliper, you'll probably need to compress that cylinder down a little bit to make more room to close everything together. Be sure to secure the bolts for the brake caliper, not just the bolts that mount the caliper, but also the top and the bottom bolt here, as well as the brake line bolt. Make sure those are all snug and secure. And with that, we are ready to move on over to the other side. The only thing left over here is to bleed the brake and put the wheel on, but before we do that, we need to finish off the rest of the calipers, and then we'll come back around and bleed this later. Let's move on to the other side. Over here on the other side, I got that brake caliper off while you weren't paying attention. Now I just need to get the brake rotor out of the way, and we'll see if we have to fight these brake rotor mounting screws. I got those screws out that are holding the rotor on, so this is loose. I can take this off now. I've got my new brake rotor here. I'm going to set that in place. Well, I got the new caliper in place and I got the bolts in. I'm going to take a slightly different approach this time. I'm going to wait to put the brake line on until I get the pads in place and get that all secured. Hopefully that will help keep it a little bit cleaner. Another thing I'm going to point out here, this goes in place a lot better if that metal bracket, that noise maker, if that is down and on the back side of that brake rotor. Once again, now that I have that closed up, I'm going to go ahead and put that bottom bolt in place, and then I will get my brake line connected. With the caliper tightened down and in place and the brake line secure, I can move on to the front now, and we'll come back here later and do the brake bleeding, and then we'll put the wheel back on and we'll be set. I got the front of the vehicle up on jack stands. Now I just need to remove the wheels. I like to take the wheels and place them underneath the vehicle in a way that it would act as a safety device in the event that it were to fall off the jack stands. There are two 17mm bolts holding the front brake caliper in place. Remove those. Okay, we got the brake caliper up and out of the way, sitting on my handy bucket there. And whoever did these brakes last, they got that screw out, and it looks like they put this one back in. So we'll see if we can get that one out. Yeah, what do you know about that? We broke it off. That's a lot easier than drilling it out. Our new brake rotor is in place. I've got my new brake caliper here ready to install. I have an L right there where the brake bleeder is. That indicates that this one goes on the driver's side. I got the new brake caliper secure in place and the two 17mm bolts tightened down. I'm going to go ahead and remove the bottom bolt here from the caliper so that I can swing that open and put the pads in place. And with that bolt out of the bottom, we now have this opened up where we can put our pad brackets in place. All right, with that in place, I'm going to go ahead and put that bottom bolt in place and snug that down tight, and then I'll move my brake line over. Size 14, and I'm going to say that's good. I don't want to break that. Over here now on the passenger side, we'll go ahead and remove that brake caliper and brake rotor. Someone got these bolts really tight. Brake rotor and brake caliper in place. I've got the bottom bolt out and I swung this caliper open. I'm going to go ahead and get these clips set in place. All right, with all the bolts tight, we're good to start moving on to bleeding the brakes. Okay, we are ready to start bleeding the brake system. There is a sequence that you're supposed to do this in. First, you start with the driver's side front, you move over to the passenger side front, and then the passenger side rear, and then you end on the driver's side rear. All right, now we're bleeding the brakes here, and I've got my lovely assistant in here helping me out. There are different ways of bleeding the brakes. My preferred method is to use an assistant. While they pump the brakes, I am down loosening the valve to let air bubbles out and old fluid. So I let them go ahead and pump the brakes to build some pressure. And while they hold the brake pedal down, I loosen that bleeder valve and let some fluid and air bubbles out. When you get some fluid in the line, I have a piece of hose here that I was able to attach to the bleeder valve. When you do get some fluid in there, you should be able to loosen that bleeder valve and let your assistant pump the brakes while fluid and air bubbles get pushed out. You'll see it, and it works quite well. All right, I can see we've got no more bubbles coming out, and the fluid's nice and clear. And we're going to move around to the passenger side front. And be sure to keep your fluid topped off. You don't want that running out on you. I didn't get video of me bleeding the brake over here on the front passenger side, but the same steps that we took on the driver's side, you will use over here as well as on the rear of the vehicle. So go ahead and do the front passenger side, then move back to the rear passenger side, and then finish on the rear driver's side. With the wheels back in place, we're ready to go take it for a test drive now. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found this video helpful, be sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe. If you have any helpful tips, please leave those in the comment section. Thanks again.